We are pleased to be joined once again by John Mcnamara, the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. John, welcome back to the program.
Nope. Thanks for having me again. Good morning.
Appreciate it. How have you been? How's your team been at the MRLA recently?
Well, we're busy but good. Obviously, restaurants are open again, and people are starting to be more comfortable going out. It's obviously a different universe everyone's living in every sector of the economy, but we're happy to be open.
It's so critical during this season. We've spoken before with David Lorenz from Travel Michigan about how important travel in the state of Michigan and tourism, the tourism industry, and people moving about the state for recreation is going to be during the season, and hotels have played a huge part in that each and every year. And this is a year that's maybe a lot more concerning, maybe for hotels, as people maybe decide, okay, we're going to go camping instead because we don't want to stay in a place. And we've talked before about all the safety measures that they're taking. It's been a while since we've last spoken. How are our hotels doing in the state of Michigan? Are they still in a state of flux, or are they doing better now than they were before?
They're largely still in a state of flux. We're seeing great numbers in Mackinac Island and Traverse City and Petoskey, your more tourist populated areas. But your more business centered hotels, obviously business travel is still largely frozen. So it sort of depends where you are geographically, but largely in a state of flux.
John, the governor's new mask executive order went into effect on Monday. Obviously, it's going to affect restaurants to some extent. I mean, they had some required masks unless you were eating before, and certainly now they're going to have to require masks in many of their locations. Similarly, with lodging places as well. How is that affecting businesses that are in your association?
It's been a mixed bag. We've had some members who have said, we're glad it's now a law and they can sort of push back on the governor. We also have people who aren't happy about it, largely because that first person you see in a restaurant is usually the host or hostess, and for a lot of people, that's their first job. So you're having people as young as 15 or 16 years old trying to tell adults what to do and enforce this law, and it just puts them in a tough spot.
How critical has local law enforcement been for these restaurants and for these hotels and so on that do have that situation where you have the 15 or 16-year-old that's at the front desk, that's the first person that you're talking to, and they have to address that situation, and maybe people are getting a little bit aggressive, are getting a little bit heated in that situation. How critical has local law enforcement been to helping these businesses keep that situation safe and cool?
No, they've been critical, and I'll specifically mention the Dearborn Police Department was one of the first to reach out to businesses in Dearborn, basically saying, if anyone gives you any trouble about wearing a mask or anything like that, call us and we will be there as soon as we can. And we're also seeing some local law enforcement who have said we're not going to enforce it. So again, it's a mixed bag, and it depends where you are in the great state of Michigan.
John Mcnamara with us. He is the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association, with us again on the Oakland County Megacast. John, a lot of these businesses that have to be enforcing these mask rules already had regulations in place before. We know for sure that was the case with restaurants, many of whom had required masks before you got to your seat and before you were eating, and when you weren't eating, you were required to wear a mask. Now, of course, that changes the dynamic a little bit. How are restaurants changing that dynamic now to be able to still work properly and work as effectively as possible and provide a great experience while still following all the laws that are in place?
It truly is a partnership. So obviously, restaurant employees are on their feet their entire shift, and they're wearing a mask their entire shift. So, all we're asking for the general public is that, maybe 30 seconds when you walk in the door to when you sit down, to put that mask on. And for the most part, people are playing by the rules, and they're realizing that your mask is your cost of admission right now in the world we're living in. Unfortunately, not everyone is, and that's restaurants are dealing with that on a case by case basis, excuse me. But for the most part, everyone's doing their job and following the rules and complying.
John Mcnamara with us. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association. And we talked about previously about how important travel and tourism is to the state of Michigan, and we talked about the state of the hotels in our state right now. For those who maybe are concerned, We knew before when you explained it that hotels were surprisingly taking a lot more safety measures than maybe one would think on the surface. But at this point in time, with all that we've learned in the last month or two since we've last had you on, how much safer are hotels now for COVID-related guidelines than they maybe were before?
Obviously we're continuing to learn more about this pandemic and what it does, but hotels are doing anything and everything they can. Lobbies are being cleaned every hour on the hour. They're putting spacing people between every other room when they can. They're washing everything daily. Their hotels are still safe. Hotels were safe during this whole time. Again, hotels were never forced to be closed. So anyone who is hesitant, I would just encourage you to go out. Give hotels that opportunity to prove how safe they are and prove what they will do to keep you safe during all of this. But the hospitality industry was a vanguard for health and safety before this outbreak, and they're continuing to be throughout this.
John, we've seen a recent spike in COVID-19 cases in the state of Michigan. Just earlier on in the week, those cases were around 400 to 500. Last week, the high end was around 600. And then midweek this week, we saw a large spike up to right around 891 cases in the state of Michigan, with another 158 probable cases as well. Any cause for concern for our restaurants in particular, for our hotels also, that there may be a second shutdown? And what would a second shutdown do to our restaurant and hotel industries in the state of Michigan?
Absolutely. And I get this question multiple times a day from members just sort of asking what's going to happen. I think a second shutdown, if it happened, would probably look something like indoor dining is closed. You could still do outdoor and you could still do takeout, but it would be catastrophic to the industry. I mean, there are people who are still not even close to back to where they should be, and staff who don't want to come back because it's safe. And, there's still plenty of people in the general public who are not comfortable going into a restaurant again, and that's completely fine. We understand that concern. But, a second shutdown would be, detrimental to this industry.
And all the more reason then, in that case, that we're urging people to continue to wear their masks and continue to follow those guidelines, because that, even if it's doing a small part, it's doing some part to help keep these businesses open who have already struggled so much during this pandemic to provide the same services that they're typically providing, but with less staff and with less of a profit margin coming in than they already had.
Absolutely. And, when this first all happened back in March, everyone was very supportive, and, there was Takeout Tuesday, and there was, you need to continue to tip in cash and do all the things that you can do to help the restaurants. And the most important thing you can do to help the restaurants right now is wear your mask. And, again, it's not long. It's the time you walk in the door, the time you sit down at a table or sit down at the bar, and if you get up when you leave, wear it until you get out the door. So we're not asking a lot of anyone to do this, and it's helpful to the general public. It's helpful to the staff. It's their job. They have bills to pay too, and if they can't do their job, then it's just bad for the industry, and it's bad for everyone.
John, just another couple minutes before we let you go. We talk a lot about the regulations in place in restaurants in terms of mask wearing. What about in the hotels? And a lot of the time you're in your own room, you're not around a lot of other people, so you don't have to really wear a mask in that situation. But where are people required to be wearing masks when they are in a hotel, and what does that look like?
So it would be, when you're checking in, we're seeing a lot of people who are going to contactless check-in. And even, if you, obviously, you can't walk into the lobby and sit down and do a breakfast buffet right now. We're seeing a lot of people who will put, a yogurt, a bottle of water, and a piece of fruit in a brown bag. And that's sort of the breakfast to go. So, it would be anytime you're in a lobby, walking in or out of a public space. But obviously, once you're in your room, you don't need to have it on. The gyms are currently closed. The pools are currently closed. So, there aren't really gathering spaces in hotels available right now. So it would just be, when you're getting to your room or when you're getting to your car to leave.
John, anything else that's important for us to know before we let you go today?
I would say no, and I'll quote our governor and say, mask up Michigan, and do everything you can to encourage your friends to do the same.
John, we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. John Mcnamara, the Vice President of Government Affairs with the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association.